Welcome. Today's day 5,187 that Boswell's been here and been in business. And thank you. It was not all me. And I'm thrilled to welcome SA Cosby here to Boswell. He's the author of Blacktop Wasteland, Razorblade Tears. Recently released his first novel, My Darkest Prayer. Co-author as well of The Rhythm of Time, the kid's book he wrote with Questlove. He's, I don't know, the fastest rising star in crime fiction right now, I think is the best fair way to put it. He's here to talk about his new book, All the Sinners Bleed. I've read it. I've read all of these books, actually. I love them all. You can pick about pretty much any newspaper that's in print in the last couple of weeks and find a glowing review of this novel. So instead of that, I'm going to give you my take on it because that's what you all came for, right? Crime fiction kingpin Cosby grabs the police procedural by the throat and dunks it into the murkiest depths of the Chesapeake Bay. This book gets as dark as a moonshine blackout as Cosby's heroes stare straight into the heart of the South and, let's be honest, America's worst bugaboos: race, religion, good old boy politics, fanaticism, violence, the blackest parts of broken men's hearts. I think Cosby bends language to his will and coins more than a couple delightful new Southernisms along the way. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome, man.
Thank you. I think the review was better than the book. It's like...
Oh, you stop. Yeah, congrats. Speaking of the review and everything, this just hit the New York Times list. So instant New York Times bestseller.
That never gets old. You never get tired of hearing that. That's great. I'm gonna have that on my driver's license when I get pulled over next time. It's like, sir, you know how fast you were going? No, but I'm a New York Times bestseller. I don't know.
But did you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Hell yeah. It's been a wild ride the last few years for you. You've been all over. I saw you on the Tonight Show recently. I have a question for you about it all. The Razorblade Tears last year was one of Barack Obama's summer picks of the year. How's it feel to know the former president is like sitting with his bazillion-dollar view reading your book, man?
I hope he skipped the dirty words. Like knowing the president read your book is sort of like cursing in front of your mama. It's like, I'm really a nice person, Mr. President. Skip the whole wood chipper and the broken finger part. No, seriously though, it's an incredible honor. I mean, it's just, I remember I was actually sitting at my computer in my modified office, which ain't really the office, it's a spare room in our house that the cat seems to think he owns. That I'm a squatter in his place. But anyway, I was sitting there, I was actually editing All the Sinners Bleed. And my phone started vibrating, and I was like, "What's going on?" And one of my friends was like, "Have you been online today? You been on Twitter or anything?" I said, "No." And they're like, "Oh, you should go on Twitter." I'm like, "Oh, am I being canceled? I don't know what's going on. I haven't like kicked a dog or anything." So anyway, I go online, and I was so not expecting anything like that I saw myself tagged in a bunch of posts. Oh, that's pretty cool. And I was like, "Oh, President Obama's summer reading list. I'll check it out." I'm scrolling through it. It took me like 10 minutes to realize I was on it. I'm like, because I saw like people I like.
You said that. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, Sylvia Moreno Garcia's on there, and all these people that I know, and I'm like, "Oh, that's great for them." And I'm like, "Oh, that's me." Oh, and like I remember I went into the living room like crying and laughing at the same time, holding the phone in one hand and my bowl of Fruit Loops in the other. But it's just one of those things you'll always remember where you were when you heard it, and I'll never forget it. It's incredible.
It's incredible. It is. Fruit Loops, is that the writing fuel? That's what makes the magic happen?
That's the 12-year-old in me. That's his one extravagance. Because when I was a kid, we were really poor and we could never afford Fruit Loops. We used to get Fruit Rings, which is this horrible cereal in a bag. It's not even a box. It's like, "Here, you poor bastards, eat this." And my mom used to always tell us, "Well, Fruit Rings are just as good as Fruit Loops." And I wanted to like really just rise up in my John Houseman voice. "No, it's not." And the sooner you understand that, the better we all will be.
Well, that's one of the ones of the commercial where you squat down, look on the bottom shelf.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's my one extravagance. It's Fruit Loop and like good whiskey every once in a while. Not in that order, not together.
So let's move on to the new book. All the Sinners Bleed. Maybe give us like the elevator pitch for it for
Yeah.
anyone who doesn't know yet.
Yeah, sure. So All Sinners Bleed is the story of Titus Crown, former FBI agent who returns to his hometown of Sharon County, Virginia, ostensibly to take care of his father after a hip replacement. But while he's there, he decides to run for sheriff because traditionally, historically, the sheriff department in Sharon hasn't been kind to most people, especially people of color. And to the surprise of everybody in town, he wins. And so on the 1 year anniversary of his election, there's a tragic school shooting where a beloved school teacher is killed by a former student. And then as Titus tries to de-escalate the situation, the former student is killed by his deputies. And that opens a mystery because once Titus investigates the crime, he finds out that the teacher, the student, a former student, I should say, and a third mystery person were a trio of serial killers. And they've been using Sharon County as their dumping ground for who knows how long. And so Titus dedicates himself to finding that person to bear witness for the dead. But also he's got all the other things that the sheriff has going on. He has expensive reports he has to fill out. He has a far right group that wants to hold a Confederate pride march, and all these things are swirling around at the same time. So he has to stand up and face the darkness while also dealing with like the mundanity of life as well.
Of course, I really love in this book how you use that mystery. You use all these different directions as a way to take him throughout Southeast Virginia, particularly throughout this county, and really explore the territory. I think you do that really well in all of your books. I do. And I know it's your home, of course, but what's the magic that makes you keep writing about it there?
I think it's just because I know the places so well. I love the story. I grew up in a big family. My dad had like 11 brothers and sisters. My mom had 6. I have a ton of first cousins, which made dating in my hometown terrible because like everybody's related. Oh, that's your cousin. Is she really though? It really? But you know, it's a part of that sort of being in that big family. There's a big oral tradition, oratory. My uncles were all storytellers. My aunts were all great raconteurs, and so being around that is sort of this storytelling tradition. You know, and all my like Sharon or Red Hill or Queen County, they're all the same place. They're my hometown, Matthews. I just changed the name so people won't get mad at me. But I think we were just talking about this before. I do think I want to eventually challenge myself to set books outside of Southeastern Virginia, outside of the Chesapeake Bay. But
That
you
to
know,
avoid people getting mad anymore.
you know, it's funny. People don't really get mad. I did that because I thought people get mad.
Right.
Everybody wants to be in the book. Like everybody wants to get killed in the book, and I'm like, I will literally be in the Walmart buying groceries and like, hey, so I was wondering, can you put me in the next book? And I'm like, have you read my books? Because a lot of times people get shot in the face. But if that's what you want, I mean, you know, far be from me to deny you your wishes. But no, I think it's also the place that I love. I really genuinely, earnestly love where I come from. I love Virginia. I love the South. And so part of me feels like I think there's this misconception that the South is like if you watch Fox News, you think the South is the sole providence of neo-Confederate apologists, and nothing could be further from the truth. The South has an indigenous community, it has Latinx community, it has a LGBTQ community, it has obviously black and white, and all types of culture find themselves in the South. The South is the mother of America. Everything that is America comes from the South. It comes from those colonies originally, and also, you know, the South is the site of one of unfortunately many of America's great sins, the Civil War, something that we're still litigating. The South's the only place, the Civil War is the only war where the losers get to dictate the principles and how the history is told. And so for me, I feel like it's almost my duty to talk about the Black community there, the indigenous community there, the trans and gay and non-binary folks there, and also just the not I'll say regular, but the folks that I grew up with, the folks that I knew as a kid, my friends' dads and moms and aunts and uncles. All those stories are important. And so whether it's Razor Blade Tears and talking about Ike and Buddy Lee coming to grips with their homophobia and realizing that they should have loved their sons better in life than they do in death, or whether it's Titus, realizing that the city or the county that he loved maybe doesn't love him back. All those stories are important, and I love telling them.
And I think you tell them really eloquently. I think that's you touched on this a little bit. Family storytellers. I love how much in your books it comes through, how much you also love language. It's so obvious throughout all of the books, and especially this one, you capture the sounds and the voice of Down East Virginia so well. Southernisms that I mentioned. You've got an ear an ear for how it all sings. So how did you first fall in love with language and words?
I think it also goes back to that, like growing up in a big family, it's like when you talk, so Southern colloquialisms are both at one time descriptors and just things that drive the conversation. If you tell somebody like, I was talking to Jimmy Boy the other day, man, he dumb as hell. How dumb is he? And it was like, if brains were grease, he couldn't put it on a griddle. And so you say things like that, or my grandfather one time, he was talking about one of my uncles, this girl that my uncle was dating, and he was telling my mom about it. And he's like, I mean, she's a nice girl, but she's ugly. And I was sitting there and I was like, why do you say she's ugly, Grandpa? He said she walked by the refrigerator and the milk went sour. And I'm like, oh. And it's all a part of this sort of communal tapestry conversation that's constantly happening and constantly going on in the South. It's not an affectation. If I go somewhere in my hometown, I can, holler at somebody, we speak to, hey, how's it going? And between their friends and my friends and my cousins, we all know each other. And so when I write, I want to replicate that. I want you to feel that communal sense. I want you to feel that sort of embodiment of we all know each other, which makes it great, but also makes it rough. And then also, I love the musicality of language. I love the musicality, the rhythm of dialogue. One of the worst things about being in lockdown was I couldn't eavesdrop on people at bars anymore, because I love listening to conversations. I love the rise and fall of conversation, the sturm and the drang that comes with it. The way people cut each other off in conversation, the way people will pontificate. And also you hear like great partial stories when you're eavesdropping. Like I remember we were in a bar one night and this lady was breaking up with her boyfriend. It was very obvious it was a breakup, and he was like, another thing, I've never liked your iguana. And I'm like, what did the iguana do? Like,
Yeah,
he didn't hurt nobody. And so
what's wrong with freckles?
yeah, exactly. It's like, I like y'all to know Guillermo's a fine iguana. But and so I love that musicality. One of the great, if not the greatest literary linguists just passed recently, Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm Cormac McCarthy, but I love what he did with language, how he just he bent it and forced it to his will to express what he wanted to express. And if he couldn't make it do that, he just made up a word. And so I just love the power that language has and the way you can use it, not just as expository dialogue, but as a way to talk about your characters. The way, not only what characters say, but how they say it. Are they taciturn? Are they verbose? Are they gregarious? Do they keep keep it close to the vest? All of that is a way to give your readers an idea of who your characters are. Mm-hmm. And so with Titus, there's a little bit, and Titus has a little bit of a sense of humor, but he's very straight-laced. He's very, like one of his ex-girlfriends said, he's very tightly wound. And so you see that in the way he talks, the way he carries himself. It was funny because a friend of mine who read a rough draft of Alzheimer's Bleed, she told me, she said, the only time Titus truly laughs in the book is when he's talking to his brother, talking to his dad. And I didn't realize that. I didn't do that on purpose. That's just the way. But that all comes from how he talks and how he carries himself. So language is a big part of that.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that relationship in a little bit. One of the things I love about him is he has these zingers left and right, but they're always said flat, completely straight faced and everything.
He has a very deadpan way of saying it. Although I will say one of my favorite lines is he gets called to a bar fight and his brother has a very vigorously defended his brother's honor with these other two gentlemen who are now going to the hospital. And there's a third guy there who wants to fight his brother. And he's like trying to get to him and people are holding him back. And Titus very deadpan says, Cotton, stay over there because ain't nothing over here for you but regret. And it's and he's like, Cotton does not realize this is a threat. And I'm not gonna ruin it for you, but Cotton, he don't listen. So it's just Titus has this very linear but also very deadpan way of talking, but he gets his point across.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of language, speaking of picking up on things and eavesdropping, I had another coworker of mine who was saying, does he just eavesdrop? Does he go out and tape everybody's conversations and everything? And I told her, and I'm gonna give away a little bit of your secrets here. That I know a little bit of a secret how the soup is made here, at least how the characters get named. If you're all right if I tell that. Yeah. So we did a virtual event when the Blacktop Wasteland came out, and as Sean and I were talking for a little bit beforehand of the event, as you do, there's a little bit of downtime and we're chatting, and we got to talking about where I'm from and my dad's name. I'm from West Virginia, and we're talking about our mutual kind of Southern-ish backgrounds, and my dad's name comes up, and Sean kind of looks at me and goes, "That's a really good name. Man, that's a good name." And so we keep talking, but I see him pull a notebook out of the side of his, and I just see him start scribbling and shove it aside there. And sure enough, then Razorblade Tears comes out, and my dad's name is Buddy Lee.
It was such a
So-
perfect name for the character, though. I had the way to encapsulate a lot about him in a short period of time. And it's funny because I know that Buddy Lee, I know another buddy, I know a buddy Joe, but that didn't fit, right? It just and it's weird because you can't explain it to somebody who's not a writer. But Buddy Joe just didn't work. It just didn't sound right.
Yeah.
And then Buddy Lee had that rhythm I was looking for. So apologies or thank you to your dad.
he read it. He liked it. So he's cool.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. No, he's cool with it. But my question there, I mean, is there anything you won't steal for a book?
I use it all. I use everything. Like
Good.
a lot of
As you should.
But you know what's funny? A lot of the stories that I've either tried to put in books, a lot of times when I send it to my editors, they're like, "Oh, that's too unbelievable." I'm like, "No, that really happened. I was there. I saw my brother fight an opossum in the outhouse. That's not a made up story.
Who won?
The opossum. I mean, he's undefeated. But all that, a lot of those things are things that I grew up behind a bar in Southeast Virginia. It was an illegal bar, it was a shot house. I remember Friday night sneaking out the house and climbing into across the fence and seeing my dad and my uncles hanging out and playing pool and getting into ruckuses. And so all of that, those memories, some of those direct memories or experiences make their way into the book. But it's always funny to me how, like, my very first book I tried to get published, and we sent it to a bunch of different companies, and they were like, I can't believe all this happens in a small southern town. And I was like, because you've never lived in a small southern town. There's nothing to do on Friday night except fight, drink, and another F. And so it's like, I mean, fornicate, stop being dirty minded. But there's nothing to do because of the proximity to everybody. Everybody knows each other. I've literally gone to a bonfire with people that I got fighting with at the bonfire, then had to drive back together because they couldn't leave me because they didn't want my mom mad at them. So all of that kind of works its way into my writing.
That's the way you got to decide who's got to sit in the back of the truck or the bed of the truck.
That's who outside who gets killed in the book.
But speaking of this book, this is kind of a new direction for you. I mean, your last two books were, real barn burners, but the main characters were criminals, were ex-cons. In All the Sinners Bleed, though, you've taken the police procedural, and I think you've really grabbed hold of this form and made it your own. But what prompted the shift for you? What made you take in that direction?
I constantly want to challenge myself as a writer. I constantly want to get better as a writer. It's not easy writing about outlaws, but it's easier because they don't have to follow the rules. Buddy Lee and Ike can ride around, Southeastern Virginia and Richmond, beating up people and breaking fingers, as long as they don't get caught. Same thing with Bug, and Bug is an expert at not getting caught. And so as long as you don't get caught, you don't really have to follow the rules. They have a code, but it's very flexible. Like I remember, I'll real quick, I'll talk about Bug. So every Mother's Day, I post on Twitter or some social media the scene from the movie 3:10 to Yuma, where Russell Crowe throws the deputy off the cliff, and right before he does it, he whispers in his ear, he's like, "I always liked you, Byron, but you never knew when to shut up." And he's like, "Even bad men love their mamas." And he throws him off the cliff, right? And I said on Twitter a couple of years ago, I said, I think Bug would concur. Even bad men love their mamas. And this lady came into the tweet like, "Bug is not a bad man. Do not say that about him." And like, ma'am, he kills like 9 people in the book. I'm just saying.
Ma'am.
But I am honored that people connect with the story like that. But I mean, I created the guy. So But with this, I wanted to challenge myself, and I really wanted to challenge my character. I wanted to see what it was like to write about a character who does have a moral code, not only personally, but professionally. A character who, if he's doing his job right, and Titus really tries to do his job right, he doesn't bend from that. He doesn't deviate from this moral code. A big influence on this book was True Detective season 1. Anybody watch that? Yeah, I loved it. Loved it. I watched it all in one night. I was sick, and my partner had been out. I had a real bad stomach virus. Like it was terrible. I was Donald ducking it all around the house. I have no time for pants, and we just don't have time for pants. The whole procedure is too complicated. But But I was really sick, and my cat was laying on the couch with me, and she came back from doing running errands, and she's like, "Hey, I know you've talked about this, and we never watched it because we didn't have HBO at the time. It's a long story, but she brought the whole season, and I watched the whole season in one day, 8 episodes back to back to back to back, and I always fascinated the idea of really bad men who keep other bad men from the door, and I didn't want Titus to be really bad, but I wanted him to have a moral complexity. I wanted him to have faults and foibles, and I wanted him to feel like he was a bad man. I wanted him to almost have a penance that he was working on. And so, what does it look like when that character is pushed to the limit? What does it look like when his moral compass is really ground into the ground? How do you react? And so that's sort of why I did it. Which is funny because I never plan on doing it again. I just wanted to try. I always like trying different things, and then like I don't know, my editor's like, "Oh, you think you got enough Titus book in you?" Like, I don't know. We'll see.
I think a lot of people want to know that. I think a lot of people want to know that. Man, you've just ruined True Detective for me, though. I hate to say, I'm never going to be able to see that show and not picture you running to the bathroom.
You think I feel? I got it in my head.
Stomach gets upset when you hear the theme song.
Exactly.
You were talking about people who are reacting to your characters, and I think that's really interesting. We were talking about that too. Do you think about the readers? Are you thinking about the audience to some degree when you're writing? And I'm curious, particularly with this book, with all the sinners, were you thinking about or hoping maybe this book reaches folks that maybe the previous two books didn't reach in some way?
I mean, I don't think I'll think about that, but I definitely wanted to have a conversation. So a little bit about me. I was raised, like I said, in Southeast Virginia. I was raised in a Pentecostal Baptist church, which all that means is our church choir had like a bass guitar and a drum kit. But it's a very intense experience. And my mother, like Tyson's mother, had a disability. My mother had spinal stenosis. And so I remember for a long time, my mom really was turning toward faith and faith healing to try to help herself. And some people came by the church from the church one day, and they prayed over her and they laid hands on her, and they're like, "All right, get up, Sister Cosby," and she couldn't. And then I remember them telling her, "Oh, you're not praying hard enough." And I was like 9 or 10, and it infuriated me because I knew how hard she'd been praying. I'd seen it. I mean, my brother had helped her get on her knees, and so that was the beginning of a lifelong sort of love and hate relationship with religion. I wouldn't say hate, but a sort of a very difficult situation in myself with religion, where I wanted to really, if not understand it, get a hold of it, get a grasp of it. I don't have a problem with religion. I don't hate religion. And somebody accused me that early this week when they read the book. But I do think I hate hypocrisy and I hate manipulation. And, Steve Harvey, of all people, says, church capital C, church little c is the building, right? Yeah. Church capital C is the community around it. And like, it's just, for me, it's one of those things. I really want to talk about spirituality. I really want to talk about the idea that you don't have to be in a church building to be spiritual, and you don't have to go to church to be a religious person. I think you can find spirituality walking through the woods. You can find spirituality, listen to your daughter or your son laugh when they're first born. I think that's something that's important I want to talk about. But I definitely wanted to talk about that idea. Flannery O'Connor has this great quote, and she says, somebody asked her, was the South Christ-centered? She's like, I don't think it's Christ-centered, but I think it's Christ-haunted. And I think it's haunted by the hypocrisy of Christianity, for a religion that purports to be all about brotherhood. I come from a town of 8,000 people. There are 23 different churches. So there's sort of this fractious relationship that we have toward religion, where everybody thinks their religion is better. Everybody thinks their religion is right. I don't have an opinion on that, but I do think I wanted to talk about how that affects a small town, how that's a microcosm for the way it affects the rest of the country. And again, in the book, Titus and his father disagree about religion, but he loves his father. He never denigrates him for his religious belief. In fact, he stands up for him at one point. And so I really think that's important. We can have a difference of beliefs. We can have a difference of opinion, as long as your opinion is not founded in my inability to exist. And so with Titus and his father, they're able to have that. And I really wanted to have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna throw out like 4 questions now, but no, I think it's fascinating how you describe there's so many different ways of practicing religion in this book. I really think you explored in a lot of fascinating ways, because you have everything. You've got
snake handlers.
Yeah, that's I was
But
going to say
then-
snake, which is terrifying. I mean, I don't know if anyone's been to or seen video of a snake handling church. This is not gentle handling. Like this is they're overhand pitching, chucking rattlesnakes at each other. It's a terrifying thing.
rattlesnakes, water moccasins, and it's this sort of the idea that their religion, their faith is so strong they won't be injured, and it's a beautiful thing in one way, but also it's sort of an insult to other people. Just because I don't want to pick up a rattler doesn't mean I'm going to hell. But or maybe I don't know. I mean, but
They end up being right.
Exactly,
Oh gosh,
they're the supreme beings all along. It was us all along. But I do talk about Methodists, I talk about Baptists, there's Catholics in the church, because all that's in my hometown. There's two, like I said, there's 23 churches, there's 3 Catholic churches, there's 15 Baptist churches, there's like 3 Methodists, and I think 1 Presbyterian church. And so again, this idea of religion as both a comfort and a cudgel was important to me when I wanted to write about the book. And I wanted Titus, he's not my avatar, but is a character that I can sort of talk about these things through and sort of really delve into them. So the serial killer is the candy, and the medicine is the discussion about religion and how it affects us.
Of course. I think it's the second time you've called religion, both a crutch and a cudgel to me. And I think that's, you nailed particularly the way it's used as a force of terror in so many ways. Particularly the Christian nationalist group that wants to march in town and everything.
Oh yeah. And that's based on a real group back home.
Yeah.
That's real. That's based on a real group that was founded by my former history teacher.
Oh my God.
And yeah, I know, that's how I felt. And like I got into a debate with him. I didn't even want to get into this debate. So I went to a town meeting, a county meeting. He was there presenting. He presented this long, fanciful, beautiful lost cause tale. And to the point that he said, even black men fought for the rights of the Confederacy because they were about rebellion. And I was like, well, I gotta say something now, because you putting that out there. So I got up and I asked him, and I'm not gonna say his name. I'll make up a name. So Mr. Johnson, I said, Mr. Johnson, you're my high school. Yeah, actually, it's my AP European history teacher. Yeah. And I said, do you really believe any slave owner in his right mind would put a gun in the hand of a slave? A man who's seen his wife abused, seen his children abused, had himself whipped and beaten. So I said, what you're telling me is you think either black people are so servile that they would just take that gun and fight for the rights of this person to continue owning them, or you just made it up and you just think it sounds good. And so he's not a fan of me, but yeah, I don't really care. But I think again, to Christian nationalism, it thrives in small communities, not because people in small communities are less intelligent or less informed. I think it's because they're less exposed to everything. I think it's Mark Twain that said, a man that travels can't be ignorant. And I think that's definitely true.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's a couple other big topics in the book. I think police and moonshine are the big other themes. Let's go with a heavy one first, right? Then we'll get to but the police, I think it would be really easy, I think, and I've seen it kind of said that it's really easy to say this book, there's good cops, there's bad cops, and even cops that are in this squishy, weird, dangerous middle ground. But I don't think that's entirely the truth of this book at all. I think I don't know. I think in your book, you're really dealing with you're dealing with a lot of facts about policing. But I think one of the huge things is that we collectively decide there's a group of people who can jail people, who can judge people, and who can kill people. Like you can shoot people and that's okay. Like, how do we decide that?
Yeah, I think for me, if you ask Titus, I think in the beginning of the book, he really wants to change things. He really believes that if he just metes out justice equally, then everyone will be treated the same. But it's hard to do that when the justice system is inherently unequal. And so I think for Titus, he feels like trying to fix things is like trying to fix his house, right? He's putting paint on the walls, he's filling spackle holes and all that kind of stuff. But, the foundation is rotten and the sewer pipes have burst. And so what is the point of fixing up this house when the thing that underpins it is rotten? And I think, for me, I have this, I've had really good experiences with police, and I've had not so good experiences with police. I've been pulled over for DWB before, driving while black, and just having a car that, what's funny about small town policing especially is a lot of times the pool they pull from are the people you know, right? So
Yeah.
like one of the chief deputies in my county for years was this kid that was like, I went to school with, he was a bully, he failed a bunch of times. He's like 23 in the 12th grade. Couldn't spell cat if you spot him the C and the T. But now, but now he's got a gun and a badge.
Yeah.
And my life is in his hands.
Yep.
In the hands of the non-cat speller. And so it was one of those things that I think it's hard to come to grips with, especially if you've never lived in a small town before or lived in a small city. And then even with larger cities, like I have friends living in New York and NYPD or cities where a friend of mine who's a former NYPD cop, he said, my first day on the job, my sergeant told me, he's like, we're the baddest gang on the street. And if that's the way that you have to think about yourself, and that's the way you have to think about the people you're policing, I don't know. That's just a recipe for disaster. But I will say this, when I first started writing this book, I really wanted to talk about police corruption, police brutality. And I wanted to use a small town as a microcosm for the larger question. I kind of moved away from that because I felt like personally, I didn't have enough distance from it. I was too personally involved in it to give it the due deference that it deserved. And so I sort of expanded the scope of what I'm talking about. But yeah, Titus, he, like I said, we're not the same person when he's a character I created, but he really is trying really hard to do the right thing. And I think what he finds out is that there is no right thing here. And it's just difficult for him to accept that because of his own personal beliefs. He's someone who lost his mother at an early age. And so he tries with all his might to enforce order upon an indifferent universe. And my mom would say, if you want to make God laugh, make a plan. And Titus keeps making plans, and he doesn't realize it and also the book is sort of his journey coming to grips with that.
I'm really curious throughout too, because Titus deals with corruption firsthand in his own department. He deals with questions of, did this officer pull the trigger too quickly? Would I have pulled the trigger that quickly? Is there anything Titus doesn't do in the book that you just sat there going, man, I wish he could do this, but because of the person he is?
I really wanted him to whoop Scott Cunningham's ass all through the book.
Me too.
I was like, man, I just want him to catch him a good one. Just one good to the eye or a good kidney shot. But, because of I would do it, but Titus wouldn't. And because of who he is, he's just that morally centered person. Here's the thing. Your morals aren't really morals if they're compromised easily. And Titus could easily compromise his morals. He could easily take advantage of this position he has. In the state of Virginia, I had to research this. No one can arrest a sheriff except equally elected official. In a lot of areas, we don't elect judges in Virginia. A lot of times they're just appointed. The only other elected official is the coroner. And so the coroner is the only person that can arrest a sheriff. Yeah, even the state police can't technically arrest him. They can arrest him on state violations, but as far as like county violation, the only other person can do it. Sheriffs look it up. Sheriffs have incredible power.
Yeah.
And a lot of them feel like they trace their power back to medieval times, back to the Bible. And so Titus, with great, to quote Peter Parker, great power comes great responsibility. And he takes that responsibility very seriously. And, but yeah, there are times where I wish, he had punched Scott Cunningham, like right in the chest, just for solar plexus, just one good one.
Yeah. Oh, man. Does it happen often? I mean, are many coroners out there arresting sheriffs?
No, because everybody's terrified of sheriffs.
Yeah.
Sheriffs get in office. I mean, the sheriff that was in office when I was a kid was my sheriff my whole life. It's like he's the basis for Ward Bennings. He was the sheriff from the time I was like 9 to the time I was 35. And it was so funny because that story is based on a real story. His son ran for sheriff. Like when he was too old to be sheriff anymore, like he literally you cannot do this anymore, sir. Your bones are turning to dust. And I was like, he sat behind Jesus in the class. He was old. And so when his son ran, it was almost like a monarchy. They were just going to pass him the keys. And I guess they forgot you actually have to vote. And he lost. And he had set up this big party of the Knights of Columbus, all this liquor and all his friends were there. And then he lost and he left town. And he never came back. He's never come back. And I don't know where he is now, and so that was sort of the story I worked into the book. Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, moonshine, the other subject.
I love moonshine.
There's a lot of moonshine drinking in this book. I love that it gets pulled out both heavy times, time to celebrate. I want to know, I have my own philosophy. Again, I'm from West Virginia. I have my own philosophy of moonshine. What's your philosophy of moonshine?
So 2 things. Don't ever drink a lot of moonshine when you're sad. Don't ever drink a lot of moonshine when you said that's a mistake. Also, if you get a jar of moonshine and it has a piece of fruit, whether it's a peach or a raspberry or a cherry, do not eat the fruit. Do not eat the fruit. I cannot stress this enough. I had a friend one time, we were sitting around drinking moonshine and had a half a peach in the bottom. She ate the whole half a peach. And the next thing I know, she was out there making snow angels in the dirt with no clothes on. So don't eat the peach. Don't eat the fruit. But
I can second all of this.
yeah. No, my grandfather made moonshine when we were kids. And it was always this thing that, like you said, you brought it out for good times, you brought it out for sad times. We'd bring it out for cookouts or barbecues. We'd also bring it out after funerals. And so it's sort of this, you know what's funny? There are so many people in the South that feel like their heritage is so different than my heritage because we're different color or we have different ethnicities. But there's this sense of ingenuity. There's a sense of determination that is expressed in Southern living and rural living that comes from moonshine. An example of that. Moonshine is essentially people who do not have money to buy real liquor, and so they make it. They literally get corn and mash and they make it, and they just do it because that's what they want. They cannot be denied. You know, I have a friend named Laura McHugh who wrote a really good book last year called What's Done in Darkness. And I was talking to her on Twitter one time. We were a lot of great literary discussions go to die, but we were talking. I had asked this question. I said, what makes rural writers so visceral in our work? And I can see it in my own work. I see it in other, Eli Craner, Daniel Woodrow, people like that, Jasmine Ward. And she had this statement. She said, if you grew up really poor in a rural area, whether it's rural Virginia, rural Ozarks, the veil between life and death is frail. It is very thin. And you see it from the time you're born. You know, you can't take your dog to the vet because you ain't got no money to take yourself to the doctor. You know, it's like if you grew up poor like I did, you chop wood or you freeze to death. You know, it's like I remember my grandfather trapped rabbits, and trigger warning, rabbits make a terrible sound in a trap. It's the worst. You'll hear it and it is in my nightmares. I can hear it in my nightmares. And I remember one time we didn't have any food. My mom was disabled. My dad and her had broke up. My grandfather and my grandmother were retired. So it was like, we have to get these rabbits. And I was like, I couldn't do it. I cannot do it. And my grandfather putting his hand on my shoulder very gently and says, either we kill this rabbit or we starve to death. And that's the reality of people in the rural America, even today, even in 2023. Oh, yeah. You know, in West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, there are people who are living not paycheck to paycheck, meal to meal. And I think that is the thing that drives rural writers. That's the thing I try to replicate and try to explain in my books. And so moonshine is just a part of that. Is that sort of survival against all odds mentality.
Yeah, that's the real hand to mouth. Speaking of driving forces in your book, I think there's a couple driving forces in this book. I think there's evil and grace going on in this book. We can talk about evil if you want. I'm curious how you put yourself in the mindset to go in some of the real dark places this book goes. How do you put yourself in it, and then how do you get yourself out of it at the end of the day?
I think evil is just, like I said in the book, it's not complicated. It's just bold. Yeah. Evil, to paraphrase, I think evil can be halfway out the door before good even got his pants on. You know, because it just does. People who are evil, who are truly evil, do not care, and so they don't have any moral compunction. They don't have any conscience. For me, it's funny because I was at this big writing convention last year, and I got interviewed by Dennis Lane. So he's like one of my he's on my Mount Rushmore. It's Dennis Lane, Walter Mosley, and Elmore Leonard. And by the way, he's the nicest person in the world. He's so much fun. He's a hoot. But we were talking, and he was talking about how he just had a book come out called Small Mercies. If you haven't read it, read it. It's incredible. But he was saying how he thinks that's going to be his last book because he was telling me, he's like, I can't go to these dark places anymore. You know, I'm 56. I want to spend time with my kids. It's hard for me to come back from that. I don't know what this says about him or me. I don't have that problem. Like, I kill a bunch of kids and I go play with my cat. It's like, I'm kidding.
On the page.
But I'm saying, you know, on the page, yeah. I think because when I'm in that mindset, I'm not thinking like it's me. I'm thinking like it's the character. It's the killer. Sure. It's the bad person. And I don't really believe that every villain thinks he's a hero, he or she is a hero of their own story, but I do think every villain can justify their actions. Yeah. And so for me, when you're writing a serial killer, when you're writing a crime boss, whatever you're writing, the antagonist, the evil, it doesn't have to, if you go too far over with something evil, it becomes cartoonish. Mm-hmm. You spend too much time laughing at the evil than really taking it seriously. I find it works to kind of pull it back, maybe do half speed, because that's the type of evil that we all experience. We all got the coworker who, you know they stole your lunch. Not because they're hungry, just because they didn't want you to have it.
Should I
Yeah.
not do that?
Yeah, that's probably a bad thing,
Sorry, guys.
Yeah. But you all have and you've met that person at the DMV who you can tell they enjoy causing pain, they enjoy slowing you down. And it's those little micro evil aggressions that we meet. That we're never, most of us never going to meet a Hannibal Lecter, hopefully if you're lucky. But that's the thing I wanted to imbue my characters with. So for me, it's just trying to see the world through their eyes. It never gets to me. The only thing that gets to me is really sad scenes. Really sad scenes bother me. Like there's a scene in All Sinners where Titus, so after they discover that the serial killer's been using the county for a dumping ground, it's not a spoiler, they figure out where they've been burying the bodies. And Titus makes this his mission to go and notify the parents one by one. And that scene was so hard to write. And such a devastating scene. And so those scenes get to me. Those are the scenes where like, oh, I gotta go ahead and watch a cartoon. I gotta go lift weights or something. I gotta get out of here. But the horror and the evil, I just don't ever let it touch me. So I don't feel like I have to get away from it.
Yeah. And those scenes are not easy in the book, but they're good. On a better note, I love your depiction of Grace, of the father and son, of Titus and his father. Sheriff, just again, not spoiling anything, Sheriff Titus lives with and kind of does give a lot of hand, cares for his aging father. What struck me throughout the entire thing is how open they are with each other. The way both men, they don't withhold, not really. I mean, they push and pull and they want different things at times, but they always see each other's full humanity and offer each other full humanity. I think it's just a really beautiful depiction of what love can be, what unconditional love can be, and what grace actually is. I mean, first of all, that had to feel good to be writing that relationship.
Yeah, because my first two books are very much about toxic father-son relationships, painful father-son relationships. And I think, in all, total transparency, me and my dad didn't always have the great relationship. But we were able to repair it over the last few years. Actually, even longer than that, it's probably been 15 years. And a little bit was therapy, a little bit was just actually talking to each other. And so when I went to write Titus and Albert, I kind of was going to do the same thing. I was going to make there a little tension between them. And then I wrote that scene where Albert gives Titus a 1-year anniversary card, but it's for a wedding because he don't have one for sheriff anniversary. And that scene where Titus kind of just raises his eyebrows a little bit, and I was like, that's them. That's their dynamic. And also to me, as an African-American man, it was really important to show African-American men loving each other unconditionally without being caught up in masculinity and macho trappings. Just there's a father, there's a son, and his brother, Marquise, they love each other. The scene, my favorite scene in the book is when he's talking to Marquise after he's put him in the holding cell. And Marquise doesn't hold against him. He's like, it's your job. You got to do what you got to do. And he's going through Marquise's property. And he's talking about his shoes and his boots. And he's like, he's got a belt, as a belt buckle, that's a knife. And he asks, he's like, why do you have a belt buckle on your knife? And Marquise like, to cut people. That's what. And just that dynamic, you can see their brotherly love there immediately. And then later on in the book, they get to talk on the porch, and Titus is able to unload a really painful secret to him. And I think it's important to show that. I think it's important to articulate those relationships in fiction, in literature, and movies, and TV. Often you see, or we're shown, I should say, very negative depictions of African-American men and African-American relationships. And I wanted to really, because I'm lucky that's the relationship I have with my dad now. My dad does not read. He's not a reader, but he has all my books. And I went by to see him before I went on this trip. And I said, hey, I'm going out on tour. He's like, yeah, take care of yourself. And I was like, yeah, and I said something to the effect of, I got to get out here. I got to promote these books. My dad's 76 years old. He used to be a commercial waterman. He grabbed my wrist like a bear trap. At 76, he's still like got a vice grip. And he was like, you ain't got to do nothing but take care of yourself. And, and I was like, all right. And I looked and I said, well, I got my books up here. I know you don't read them. And he was like, yeah, but you made them. So he kind of just let it drop. But that meant so much to me. That's
really beautiful. Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to audience questions here in just a second. We got a little time for them, but I do want to say, because that really, those relationships, and especially when the three of them are together, I really think in your book, you really bring out how people, particularly in the South, particularly in that community, are caring for each other.
Oh yeah,
and I love that so much. I really think it's definitely a beautiful heart in this book.
In my hometown, like, say what you will, and it's got its problems, but man, they love me now. But it's like I haven't paid for dessert in hometown for like 2 years, but I mean, they genuinely love and care, and like even people that didn't like me, even people that didn't like me in high school were like, yeah, I know SA Cosby. So, but it's just a genuine, there's something about living in a small town in the South that I love. It's just so comforting sometimes. It's got its problems, don't get me wrong, but it's just something about knowing the people that I know. And it's just the people that knew me before I was SA Cosby. I was just big head Sean running around, and seeing them so happy for me is a lot.
For sure. So we got a little bit of time for a few questions here. Just the first one's always hard. What are you doing next? Will there be a movie? These are good examples. So someone raise their hand. Go ahead.
Great crab cakes.
Not African American, but I hear my brother.
Yeah.
And it's been great.
Oh, definitely, it's our people. It's us, and there's a way and a cadence that we speak down on the lowlands, as we call it, that I definitely try to replicate. That I definitely want. I'm honored to tell those stories. So thank you. Oh yeah, my grandfather used to tell people all the time. He's like, "Man, you so dumb. You couldn't find your ass with two hands and a flashlight." So lovely Southern colloquialism. You had a question right there. Yeah. Thank you. He killed 9 people. I don't think I can stress that enough. I love the dude. I think he's a great driver. He killed 9 folks. No. So it's funny you asked that question. So I'm working on something right now that's not Blacktop Wasteland related, but I have this dream of doing a quadrilogy about the Montage family. So do a sequel to Blacktop Wasteland, tentatively titled Gasoline Heart, and then do a prequel about Bug's father, Anthony, when he went to California, called Hell's Golden Road. And then I want to do a historical novel set in the 30s about his grandfather, who was a moonshine runner, who's based on my grandfather, who was a moonshine runner. And so, yeah, I definitely want to come back around to those guys. I like Bug. I like his family. I sort of like using them as sort of my way of talking about Virginia. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So when I was a little kid, even after my mom and dad separated, my dad would come because my mom and dad had a country divorce. Like they didn't legally get divorced. My dad just moved 10 miles up the road. And but he would come pick me up sometimes and we would get in the duster and he would take $5 and he would put on the dashboard. And he would say, if you can reach it when I take off, you can have it. And I never was able to get it till I was about 15. And it was funny because I got it. I remember that day. And it was something he was a little sad. I think he was a little sad because he's like, you're not a little boy anymore. The G forces can't keep you back. But yeah, that we had that he had that car for a long, long time. And then he got in an accident and wrecked it. My dream, don't y'all tell him, my dream is to buy a Duster like in the next year or so and go pick him up. So don't tell me that because I'll be broke before I leave Wisconsin. Does
anybody have a trailer he can borrow?
All right. Any other questions? Ask anything. I don't care. On the back. Are you calling me old? No, I'm kidding. I worked at a funeral home. I was a retail manager. I worked on a what's funny? And I don't want this to sound arrogant, but I just really wanted to write. So I just forced myself to make time for it. Like instead of going hanging out, playing pool with my buddies, I no lie, I turned down a couple of dates sometimes to write something. Cause like it just was so important to me. I felt like I was always supposed to be a writer, even when people were telling me I wasn't. And I always felt like this was what I was supposed to do. My mom told me that when I was 7 years old. Because she got mad at me because she used to read me bedtime stories. I would pick out the plot holes. It was like, why didn't all the three little pigs just build a house out of bricks? It's like, you had bricks the whole time. We got sticks and hay over here. And I just always felt like that. So I forced myself to make the time. So there were days like when I was working full time, I wrote Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And no matter what happened when I got off work, I was going to write unless I was physically ill or it was a family emergency. And I think you make time for what's important to you. And I don't mean to sound flippant with that, but writing was just so important to me. It was the only thing I felt I was good at. And I was like, well, if this is it, I better get better at it. And so that's where it came from. But and I'm very blessed now. I don't have to write. I don't have to work full time. Writing is my full time job, and it's great. Oh my God! And they pay you. It's ridiculous. Any other questions? Yeah, right there. Well, it's a kind of funny story. My mom was she loved me and she respected my wish to be a writer, but she was also very hesitant about me writing because she was like, well, don't put a lot of stuff in there about the family. And don't, she was a Southern mother. She's like, don't talk about your drunk uncles and all this stuff. And I was like, I got to do what Joe Lansdale did. Joe Lansdale said, you write like everybody you know is dead. And so I kind of didn't want to go under Sean because in my mind, well, I'm gonna get picked up immediately. So I'm gonna be famous soon. So I gotta be prepared so my mom don't get mad at me. And then 10 years later, I'm still SA Cosby. But it's funny because it just sort of came out of this secret identity that I had, and then but then it was funny. My mom's passed away now, but later on when the books were coming out and they were starting to do well, and she was like, oh, you gotta tell that story about the time, your uncle, your cousin Haywood, like he passed out from too much moonshine. We brought him back around with 2 frozen beef patties. That's true story. That's true story. He passed out of the cookout from drinking moonshine, and my uncle went in the house and came back with 2 frozen beef patties and put them on each side of his neck and brought him back around. But that's where that came from. I will tell you a funny thing about real quick, the name Sean. So my mom loved the name Sean because she loved Sean Connery, but she didn't like the way he spelled it. So she spelled it SHWN. Then like my mom never drank. I saw her drink like 5 times my whole life. So one time we were having Thanksgiving dinner. My aunt convinced her to drink Thunderball, with Sean Connery was playing in the living room, and he walks across the beach with no shirt on. And my brother was about to eat a big plate, a spoonful of mashed potatoes. And my mom looks up and she's like half tipped. She's like, that's Sean Connery. That's a good looking white man. And my brother spit mashed potatoes across the table. Like, don't nobody want to hear that, mama. God, that's so gross. But that's the story of my name, Sean. We have time for a couple more questions.
We get time for 1 or 2 more, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I am neither. I'm sort of a hybrid. So what I do is I write a synopsis to myself, and it's just me telling myself the story. Like with All Sinners Bleed, for a long time, Titus didn't have a name. He was just Black Sheriff. So like he sounded like a superhero, like with Super Friends, Black Lightning and Black Sheriff Saturday mornings. And it was just Black Sheriff discovers a serial killer in town. He investigates. He has several different things coming at. That was just me telling myself the story. I use that as a roadmap when I go to write. So I'm like, oh, am I hitting this story beat? Am I hitting this thing that I want to talk about? Sometimes everything makes it into the book. Sometimes a lot of times, a lot of it doesn't. But it sort of gives me a pathway that I want to walk on when I want to go to writing. And I write when I'm working on a book. I write every day. Right now I'm not working on books. I am not writing. I'm taking a break. But when I work on a book, I write every day. I get up now. Take my partner to her job. I work from 9 to 12. I take a break for 2 hours. I watch like Ren and Stimpy cartoons, and then I go back to like at 3 and write till 6, and then I have dinner. So that's not exciting, but it gets the bills paid. So I think we got time for like maybe
time for one more, yeah.
More question.
One more quick one. I think Jano's got one. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, sir. Yes, all the time. And it's so funny because there's a movie being made out of Razorblade Tears. And yeah, they wrote in a script, and whenever the writer's strike, and full solidarity to the WGA, but whenever that's done and everybody is given what they deserve, they'll get back into that. And so I was talking to it's a directing duo that's directing it, Trayvon Free and Martin Rowe. They won an Oscar a couple years ago for a short film called I forgot what it's called, but it's about a black kid. He gets caught in a time loop, and this cop keeps shooting him over and over again. It's a powerful movie. And they've written a script. And so I talked to him the other day. He was in New York. I was in New York for something. And he was like, yeah, I'll come by. We'll chat. I'm like, all right. So he comes by and he's like, yeah. So we're like 95% sure we're going to get this actor to be Ike. And I was like, well, who is it? And he was like, I think we're going to get Idris Elba. It's not set in stone, so don't get excited. Probably shouldn't have said nothing. But
Stringer Bell himself.
But what's funny? I didn't envision him when I wrote Razorblade Tears. When I wrote Razorblade Tears, I kept seeing the actor Delroy Lindo. That's who I kept seeing. And I saw, you don't know this actor. He's a character actor. His name is John Hawkes. He was in Winter's Bone. He played Teardrop. I kept seeing him as Buddy Lee. I love Teardrop. I love characters with one name reputations. Like if you say Boba Fett, it's about to go down. And I love Teardrop. There's a character in my first book, Skunk. If you mention Skunk's name, people run for the hills. So, but yeah, I do write with characters in mind, with actors in mind, with real life people in mind. It helps me visualize the characters better. Like with Titus, I always had in my head, I kept seeing the gentleman Yahya Abdul-Mateen, he was in the recent Candyman reboot. He was Black Manta. He's been in a couple other things. I just saw him as Titus. I just saw him in the uniform and the hat. I don't know if that's going to happen, but yeah, I definitely do see that. It helps me. I write cinematically. I visualize everything, so I see everything when I write. So that's a great question. Yep.
I can't ask you a question later. It has to do with your answer. So, booksellers.
Okay.
But inspired you as the other people, and one of them is the writer Tracy Clark. And we don't have a Tracy Clark book, but we will soon because she's coming for our first event on January 10th. And this is Tricia Scalpa, one of our writers, suggested her. And I was very excited. I said, I'm going to make this work, but I didn't know that you would help me.
Tracy Clark is probably the best PI writer working today in America. She's the heir apparent to Sarah Paresky. I think she's the heir apparent to Sue Grafton. Her Cassie Raines novels set in Chicago are brutal and realistic, but also heartwarming. And I think she's an incredible writer. And she's a pantser, which I find remarkable. But she's an incredible writer, incredible author. Her books are propulsive. They're intense, but they also have a really deep heart and a really love for Chicago and the Midwest. So if you haven't read anything by Tracy Clark, rectify that as soon as you can.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's it. SA, thank you
guys
so much. Thank you all so much. Thanks again for doing this, for helping us sell other events. Thanks for book selling. It's been amazing. Thank you, folks. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you.